The sea had a voice in the west they could not ignore. It shuddered against the granite shoulder of the world and spoke in a tongue of thunder and hiss, long syllables of foam rolling up the iron weed, and retreating again with a drag of pebbles like the rattle of bones. Gulls stitched pale commas against a sky the color of forgotten pewter, and cormorants bobbed like oiled bolts in the chop. And the wind came off the sunset sea with salt enough to smart the eyes and make a man believe he was younger, or older, than his years. Casterly Rock rose from this, lion-faced and indifferent, its mane of cliff and battered brush taking the wind without bending. It had been carved by generations of hands and generations of water, a fortress that began as a beast in the minds of the first craftsmen and ended as a skull the size of a hill, riddled with mines and halls and shafts that ran like veins. Its western face met the ocean and a cliff, whose black sheen made the sea look pale. Narrow windows watched the west with the same glassy inhumanity as the eyes set in a lord's funeral mask. Beneath, at the base where spray leapt higher than a galloping horse, tunnels breathed. Their mouths were gates to old labor. The waves thrust themselves partway into the rock, and the rock accepted what it wanted and gave nothing back. On the night they came, the lanterns of Lannisport were a new constellation under the cliff. The harbor lay in a crescent, like a cupped hand. A few fisher boats hugged the breakwater, as if the great shadow of the rock had frightened them into stillness. The old bell of the port, cast with a lion relief, the metal worn smooth where generations had rubbed it for luck, was quiet, though it had been known to toll at odd hours, for fog or funerals or fires in the merchant rows. A late swell carried a slim galley to the lee of the headland, keeping out of the ribbon of lantern light. Pitch had been drawn over her seams so thickly she smelled like a coffin freshly tarred. Oars whispered in time. The sea breath was cold enough to make teeth ache. Bronn stood in the prow with his hand on the rail and let the spray salt his lip and the wind comb the hair beneath his helm. It was not a hero's posture, and he knew it. Heroes like to be seen. Bronn liked to see first. The galley's oarmaster, a man with a scar that made one eyebrow slant up permanently in a look of surprise, lifted and lowered a hand. Oars feathered. The ship slid without a ripple to a place where the cliff shadow was thick. In that thickness, sound behaved differently. It carried upward and sideways and back upon itself, so that a whisper reached the wrong ears and a groan could seem to come from within the stone. Bronn had learned to listen to spaces the way he listened to people. Some were generous, some were mean, some were empty as a beggar's belly, and some so crowded with old noises that a man's own voice sounded like an impostor. "Hold," the oarmaster breathed. The deckhands made their motions slowly. A rope was let down, black as the night that caught it. Bronn stared up. He knew where the seam was. He would have known without Tyrion's careful pointing. There was a way places had of telling men what they were. The west face of the rock seemed unbroken, until suddenly it was not, until water leapt deeper and caught on something, and the spray hung strangely. There, a slit. There, a mouth that had taken 700 years to look like a mouth. It was nothing to a lord standing behind a battlement. It was everything to men like Bronn, who had made a life of following cracks and buying second chances. He felt the old impatience rising, 2 parts hunger, 1 part the memory of sleeping with his back against tavern walls to keep men from cutting his throat, and 1 part the ache in his right knee that told him when weather was turning and when it was time to move. He had been among sellswords too long not to know what a night could do to plans. Wind could slap a lantern. A startled gull could cry at the wrong time. A drunk in the port might choose to piss off the end of a pier and see a shape he should not. The ocean was a good accomplice until it wasn't. He turned and looked down the deck. Tyrion Lannister waited in the half of the galley not meant for waiting. He stood too still for the moving world. The dwarf had a cloak pulled tight, the hood thrown back. His hair made a pale flag of itself in the wind. Bronn had known him with armor on, and with things worse than armor on him. And this was something else. Some kind of habit of the soul that made him appear composed while the water slapped and the men's eyes slid to him and away again. A skin of wine hung from a strap at his belt. Bronn did not think he had drunk from it. Tyrion had a way about him of being drunk exactly when it profited him, or when it was a mask he needed, and of being dry as a winter ditch when it seemed the moment for a cup. "The sea approves," Tyrion said softly as Bronn came down the few planks. His voice had a way of sounding like he was amused at you, even when he wasn't. It could rankle. It could also save a man's life, because laughter in the right place was like oil, easing grinding gears. "She would swallow us whole if she did not." "She'd swallow better men," Bronn said. He leaned his hip against the mast and let the sway of the boat take him. "But I've learned not to boast to water." He smelled fish on his hands, though he had touched none. It was something that happened at sea. Everything learned the taste of fish and salt, even men's words. Tyrion's gaze returned to the cliff. "There." He put out a hand and did not point, but Bronn followed the line of his wrist, the angle of his finger, and saw it again. The seam, the swallowed mouth. "Do you know the stone's voice?" Tyrion asked, eyes on the dark. "I know, Coin," Bronn said. "And doors that open when a man pushes the right way. This door opens from the water, when the tide turns and the tunnels breathe out. Rat-catchers used it when they brought their wives wine without the castellan's cut." His grin was quick, without warmth. "That's a door I understand." "The rock breathes," Tyrion murmured. "My father never believed in that. He believed in men and knives and the weight of a seal. But the rock breathes. When I was a boy, I lay awake in a chamber with a window that faced west, and I could hear where the heart was." He did not close his own, and feel the stone draw in and let out. Bronn did not close his eyes, but something of what Tyrion said settled into him. He had slept in keeps and in tents and in hollows under bramble where foxes piss, and he had never been a man who thought stones had hearts. But the sound came, long and stomach deep, as the swell pushed and was pushed in turn. If a mountain had a lung, it would make that sound. "What's the plan once we're inside?" Bronn said. He had heard the plan. He asked anyway. Men repeated plans for the same reason they touched amulets and crossed themselves in front of old trees. Repetition made the world seem less likely to turn and show a different face. "The Castellan sleeps on the third level above the salt cellars," Tyrion said. "His clerk sleeps 2 doors down and keeps a box of seals and keys under his bed, tied in a sack, because he trusts wood and rope more than he trusts men. They will not expect a knock from the sea at this hour because they have not had to expect anything for a generation. The rock teaches its men indifference. We will go up while the tide favors us. We will wake the Castellan with a voice he recognizes and ask him to be wise. If he is not wise, we will use the other language men understand." "Then?" "That one I speak," Bronn said. But the words were only half of what sat behind his teeth. The other half was an old thought that had followed him from the Blackwater to flea-bitten inns and back again. If no one is going to give you the thing, take it. It had the simplicity of a rule taught to children about fire or steep stairs. Do not touch. Do not run. Take it. He had been promised castles before. Promises were like old banners in windless halls, hanging heavy, pretty, and useless. He had smiled through them. He had smiled through men calling him friend and brother and savior, through men thinking themselves clever for knowing a clever sellsword. He had learned to keep a little hunger in him because men without hunger laid down and died when the world did not come to feed them. Hunger made a man look for seams and rock. Hunger made a man feel when the tide turned. "Your father would have barred the sea with chains if he could," Tyrion said, mouth quirking. As if the word father itself were a trick he could set for himself, and then step into to see if it still hurt. He preferred things he could measure. "We are using breath and luck, and old tunnels rat-catchers loved better than their wives." "We're using you," Bronn said. "You're the key that opens fools." He saw the dwarf's head tilt and went on. "You have your father's name, and the rock remembers names better than it remembers faces." He jerked his thumb towards the cliff. "A man inside will hear you, and he won't think of the knife at his back. He'll think of banners and festoons and the way it feels to belong to something that has stood longer than he has stood." "And that's vanity," Tyrion said, almost gently. "Call it what you like. Men live on it." Bronn lifted a hand. The oarmaster made his little flick again, and the oars dipped once, twice, in a cadence that made the hull move like an animal easing its haunch under a fence. The rope went up through the seam. The night breathed. When the water drew back into itself, a shape moved above. A small shape, as if a part of the night had decided to be a man for a moment. A knotted ladder came down, rope rungs biting the dark. The man's silhouette did not look down to see who stood below. He had been paid well enough not to look at faces. "Up," Bronn said. They went up in threes. Bronn took the first ladder with a coil of rope over his shoulder and a length of steel at his side that had no name because he did not name tools he expected to lose. He climbed without hurry. Stones were wet and rope was worse, and a man who hurried at night went to his own grave faster than men behind him could carve his name. At the top, the seam became a stone throat barely wider than a man's shoulder. Water had polished it until it had a skin. His palms came away slick. He leaned his weight forward, felt the stone's intent, this way, not that, and slid sideways where a spine of rock jutted. A hand touched his calf and then left it, trust traveling up the rope like another man might waste a breath on a prayer. Inside the rock, the sea's voice changed. It became something that lived under the bed of a child who had cried alone. It thumped slow, and then hissed. It had room to echo. Bronn felt the walls close around them and did not dislike it. He had slept in tunnels with men who snored and in tunnels with rats that walked over his face. He had learned the measurements of fear by the hair that rose on his forearms and the way his mouth went dry. Tonight, his mouth was wet. It tasted of salt. They moved in darkness a while, because light behaves like a whistle in a cavern. It calls things. Then a hooded lantern was unshuttered, the smallest sparing, a thin gold blade that showed wet stone and iron spikes hammered in by men who had believed centuries ago that the spikes would last forever. The air was cold enough to make breath visible. It made the men appear briefly like dragons in some child's imagining, their mouths blooming white smoke, the lantern making their eyes larger. "Quiet," Bronn said, softly, as if quiet itself were a person he did not want to wake. The tunnel rose. It shouldered left and then right as if the stone had grown unwilling to climb and decided to enjoy a wandering path. Far above, there was a different blackness. Bronn could smell something other than stone ahead, a stale sweetness. Wine. The imagination of it made saliva appear for a man who had not swallowed in a while. He felt Tyrion come near and then past, the dwarf's small boots careful in the way of a man who had learned to place his feet after falling often. "This way," Tyrion said, voice low. "It opens near the salt cellars. We will be behind the barrels. If the Castellan keeps his habit, he will be at table with his mistress this hour." There was an odd edge in the way he said mistress, as if he tasted rust. Bronn had thought often about the Castellan in the last week. He had given the man a face in his mind, heavy, grown comfortable in the fog of his own authority, rising at dawn to read lists and ring for boys to carry things and lift things and write things, eating too much salted beef and too little hard bread, trusting in stone to protect him. Bronn liked men like that. Their brains had worn grooves into themselves, as the days wore a groove in their routines. They were clocks that thought themselves masters of time. "Do not speak my name unless you need to," Tyrion said, as the tunnel widened to a place where a man could stand without his shoulders touching the walls. His breath came out white. "The fewer cries we wake, the longer we are unremarkable ghosts. If we reach him as ghosts, perhaps we will end the night as men." "You talk too much," a voice behind said lightly. "And yet you followed my voice here," Tyrion replied. And there was a little smile in it. The seam opened into a low room, whose ceiling beams had been set by men with more love than skill. A row of barrels sat like fat monks in the half-light. Their staves were dark with age and health. The smell that had been a ghost became a presence, brighter and more indecent. Wine, sour-sweet, the kind they drank inland when they pretended to be sea lords. Bronn laid a hand to one barrel as he passed it. Cold wood. A memory passed briefly in him, not invited. A barn somewhere in the Riverlands. Rain as loud as applause on the roof. A girl whose name he had forgotten laughing as if laughter were something her mother had told her not to do. He put the memory away and watched Tyrion approach a narrow door cut into the stone like a kiss. On the other side, a passage went up. He could feel it in his knees before he saw it. The lantern hooded further. Feet lifted and fell. They did not put their weight on the steps as if those steps would complain. At the top, Bronn put his hand out without thinking and stopped the man ahead of him. There was a murmur of men's talk through stone the way a river sounds through winter. The passage turned, and a thin blade of warmer light lay along the floor from a gap beneath the door. Bronn lowered himself and placed one eye to the gap without touching the wood. He saw nothing. The voice on the far side belonged to a man whose mouth had grown used to making itself a small circle around pieces of meat. There was laughter, the little breathless kind that comes from lying down and being flattered. Mistress, then. Tyrion had guessed true, or remembered true. There are nights when the world puts itself in a certain balance, as if the moon had put its thumb on a scale in your favor. Bronn knew the feel of it. He could smell it now, the way a hound smells the thing it has been trained to chase. He pressed his shoulder to the door, put a knife into the latch in a manner that would look like magic to a man who hoped to keep the world out by means of metal, and pushed. The door came open like a breath drawn low. He went in first. The Castellan had his back to them, bare and white as dough. The woman beneath him saw Bronn and opened her mouth to make a sound she had wanted to make all evening, by the look of her eyes. Bronn's hand came up and he placed a finger to his lips. She made another sound. It had the softness of someone who had trained her throat to shape things other men wanted to hear. Tyrion came behind like a second thought. His shadow was long in the lantern's blade. He did not look at the woman. He looked at the Castellan, who turned now with his bulk making the bed creak. The little squeal like a child's toy in a market stall. He saw a stranger first, then a man with a blade in his hand, then a small figure behind with a face he knew as a person knows the mark on their own thumb. Men had come to the rock to take things before. They had come with ladders and cries and rammed timbers and banners snapped by wind. They had not come through the sea in the breath between one tide and the next. They had not come with the Lord's second son, dead to them and alive in front of them, in a galley coat with his hair full of salt. Callan Jast, Tyrion said. He imbued the name with familiarity, the subtle weight of being in the same house together when one was small, and the other wore a different face. The Castellan gathered himself. Flesh made decisions slower than thought. Above his shoulder, the woman pulled a sheet up and turned her face away, and then back again in a way that told Bronn she had been taught early that faces were their own weapons. Who? Jest began, and stopped. Because the question was not the question he wanted. He had seen a small boy in this hall once, years ago, with a cup too big for his hand, and a father whose shadow filled the door. He had heard songs since then, and rumors. Men had a taste for telling stories about other men, so they could avoid thinking about their own lives. The Castellan's mouth opened and closed, and then opened again in the habit of saying title first. Always title. My lord. It has been too long since anyone in these halls called me so, Tyrion said softly. It is an old title, and I have not worn it because I was busy wearing another one far to the east, where the wine is thinner and the sun tries to kill men out of spite. But the sea keeps the old names, Castellan. It brings them back where they are remembered by stone, even when men have decided to forget. If this is a dream, the Castellan said hoarsely, I would wake from it. His eyes went to Bronn and then away. Bronn did not mind. He minded when men did not look away. This isn't a dream, Tyrion said. It is a negotiation. Pull the cover over your shame and rise. Bronn liked that. He could have laughed if laughing weren't a way of throwing pebbles into quiet water. The Castellan hauled himself up, dragging the sheet with him, bunching it around his hips. His face had the look of a man trying not to scratch a place that itched where others could see. He stood and sucked in his belly and bowed, which made the sheet threaten to fall. The woman gathered it for him from behind with a practiced hand. We will speak alone, Tyrion said. He did not look at the woman when he spoke. He looked at the Castellan as a man looks at his own reflection when it has said something unkind. Send her away. Bronn moved before the Castellan thought to. He was quicker than men thought when they looked at his bulk. He lifted the latch on a second door and put his body between the mistress and the room. She was pretty in the way wine is pretty in candlelight and not in the morning. He saw the mark on her shoulder a hand had left, and the faint teeth scar at the base of her throat, and the gold ring in her ear. "Seen all you came to see then?" Bronn murmured. She tilted her head. "Go on," he said. "Keep your mouth shut or you'll open it for a worse reason before dawn." She went, because she had learned early not to make mistakes around doors. Bronn shut the door and set his back to it. He watched the dwarf and the Castellan with the same eye he'd used to watch the sea. "I will not call the guard," Jast said. "Not yet." He had a way of adding that last to make his spine feel stronger to him. "You've crawled up from the sea with..." His eyes flickered to Bronn again. "Men. How many more?" "Enough to be impolite," Tyrion said. "Enough to make your life shorter if you decide to try your voice against mine. The less shouting we do in these first few minutes, the longer we will all live." So it began, but not with the shape of the beginning Bronn had spoken in his head during the day. He had expected, in some version that kept him from waking too sharply in the night, more knives earlier, more men swung out of bed with their throats parted in the first sentence. But Tyrion had brought them here with words, and now he stood on words as if the floor were boards that could crack if he jumped. There was bravery in it. Bronn had met many men he called brave, men who died with admirable stubbornness, and he had learned not to count bravery among the traits he liked in his companions. Bravery courted luck, and luck had lovers too easily and betrayed them too often. "We will go to the salt cellars," Tyrion said. "You will take from under your bed the sack you keep, and you will put it in your arms, and we will walk together through halls you know, and halls I know. And we will ring the old bell. We will wake men without waking knives. You will tell them what the rock needs from them tonight. And you will not lie to me or to yourself by pretending you are anything more than a steward of stone. Stone remembers. Men like us are breath. Men so." "And afterward?" Jast asked, and there was something like greed in the way his mouth shaped it. Small, precise greed, not one that tried to swallow whole. "Afterward we will speak about governance," Tyrion said. "About what banner flies. About who collects and who distributes. I happen to have a talent for arithmetic and argument. You happen to have keys." "Damn?" The Castellan looked at him a long moment, then turned with the stiff dignity of a man trying to be nude, while clothed, and clothed, while nude. Bronn saw the shape of his shoulder and knew where a blade would go there, and how far it would slide before it bit on bone. He did not move. He watched Tyrion. The dwarf's mouth had a set to it. Bronn had seen the night before the battle in the river. The night the world smelled of pitch and fear. The night the sky had glowed like a forge. There was a kind of stillness to him then, a stillness men mistook for sobriety. They walked together down to the salt cellars. The floor there was gritted, as if the sea had left a part of its teeth behind. A herds of barrels stood like oxen asleep. The Castellan bent in that narrow chamber, and dragged out the sack from under a bed that was narrow as his vision. The sack made little music, metal on metal, muffled by rope. The lantern's light lived on the Castellan's face like a tame animal. He swallowed. It was a loud swallow. He was about to put the sack under his arm, when the door opened, and the other treachery of the night made a shape of itself. There are two kinds of betrayal in the world, one that comes with a stranger's face, and one that comes with a friend's voice. Men prefer the first in their stories, because it makes them feel safe from themselves. The second is crueler, because it teaches something that does not leave a man afterward when he eats or touches or sleeps. The room was full of the first kind of betrayal already. It had the shape of men where they ought not be. The shape of a door that had not been opened since boys brought stolen wine through it and bragged later. The second kind stepped in now with a quiet so practiced, it was another form of courtesy. "Leave the sack," Bronn said, and his voice had the tone he used with skittish horses. He did not draw his blade. He did not have to. 3 men behind him added the kind of weight to a sentence steel adds. They were men Bronn had not introduced to Tyrion's eyes. Hard men with narrow eyes that made narrow decisions. Men whose names were nothing like poetry. Kegs, a fat-bellied smiler who was quick on stairs. Hob with a nose broken 3 ways. The youngest, Tom the Rag, whose hands had never stilled around a coin since he learned to count to 20 with his toes. Tyrion turned his head and looked at Bronn as if he had been expecting the voice and had been wondering what it would say. He had the sense to keep his hands still. The Castellan looked from one to the other as if watching a tennis game he had stumbled into and was too polite to leave. "Now," Tyrion said, and the word was without any decoration, "is an interesting time to ask me to be surprised." "I told you I know doors," Bronn said. He was calm. He put his hand out, and Hob placed something in it. It was a ring, old gold, with the lion on it so worn by fingers, no one could tell if it had been carved as roaring or purring. Bronn closed his fist around it and felt the lion's mane press into his palm. "You know numbers. I know men. The rock has been kept by numbers. It wants a man. And no. And that man is you," Tyrion said, and his mouth made a thin smile that did not touch his eyes. "If you want something," Bronn said, "take it." He let the words stand there between them like a plank from ship to quay. "You taught me that in a way. Or your father did. It's all the same to me." Tyrion didn't move. If rage came to him, it dressed well and made no noise. "The Castellan can still ring the bell. The bell wakes knives," Bronn said. "And it wakes men who only know to run down a hall and be brave and die. I'm not interested in brave men dying for other men's clarities. I'm interested in a livelihood. I'm interested in a place where the roof doesn't drip and where the walls don't require me to sleep with a dagger under my ear. I'm interested in a hall of my own." He glanced at Jast. "You're relieved, Castellan." "I don't," Jast began and stopped, because Hob had stepped forward and placed one hand on his shoulder. It was a gentle hand. The pressure in it was ungentle. Jast's mouth opened and closed. He had spent a lifetime commanding the carrying of ink pots and salting of fish, and the moving of bolts of cloth from one room to another. He had not trained for this, the moment when the air itself is cut differently, and a man's name falls a short distance that feels like falling forever. "Keys," Bronn said. "You can give them to him." He nodded at Tyrion. "Or you can give them to me. One way makes a story you might like to tell your grandchildren, if you have any." Jast's eyes darted. He looked at Tyrion again, the way a dog looks back at a man it has believed to be its master. "When another man holds me." The dwarf's face had gone blank in the way a dice cup looks blank just before you throw. "Give them to him," Tyrion said. "He personifies pragmatism." Jast's mouth trembled with the injustice of it. He knelt, because men who have always knelt for certain things cannot help kneeling for other things when told. He fumbled with the sack, untied the knot with fingers that had always been clever at knots, and pulled out a sheaf of rings and keys so thick it could have strangled a man. He looked up like a boy offering a thing to a father after breaking another thing he cannot fix. Bronn took them. A moment passed that had nothing in it, and then everything. "You don't have enough men," Tyrion said. "Not for this. Not for the day after this." "You'd be surprised," Bronn said. "About men. About what they do for gold and bread, and a hard man who greets them in the morning instead of a clerk. I've had weeks of nights like this one, and I didn't let you see them because you talk to men and make them think, and I needed them not thinking. I have spoken to the ones who matter, the ones with keys inside their heads, the guard on the water stairs, the boy who pulls the galley rope, the woman who knows when the Castellan sleeps, the old man who used to be a miner and now rings the bell and knows which rope sticks. I'm good at doors, and I'm good at men." "Bendawand. The rock won't love you," Tyrion said. "The rock doesn't love anyone," Bronn said. "Men love. Men will love the man who pays them first and lets them eat second, and doesn't have them dying for somebody else's memory of songs. I know what I am. I'm the knife at the good meal. You brought me to your table because of that, and now you act surprised when I cut. Ben? So, this is the part where I die," Tyrion said, as if describing a chess move he had seen too many times in lesser players. "No," Bronn said, and the word had weight because it surprised the men behind him as well. "You're worth too much breathing." He stepped closer, and for a moment, there were only the two of them, and the cold lantern light, and the keys hanging heavy in Bronn's hand. "You're going to be my guest." He grinned at the word, and did not trouble to make it pretty. "I'll feed you like a guest, and keep you in a room with a view of the sea like a guest. And when men come to ask for you, I will say, which of you loves him more? And how much does that love weigh? If you think to sell me, Tyrion said almost kindly, you should ask yourself who buys me, and what they do with returned property that has cut them to bleeding and laughed while doing it. I'm not selling, Bronn said. I'm bargaining. There's a difference. Selling is a thing fishwives do with men who smell like fish. Bargaining is what your father did with kings. He lifted the keys so the light found them. They were ugly and beautiful, the way any tool is when it promises power. We'll go up, he said. We'll tell them the truth. The Castellan has been relieved. The rock has a new hand on its day. The rock does not change hands, Tyrion said. And for a moment Bronn saw the boy he had been, standing in a room where his voice was smaller than another man's shadow. Everything changes hands, Bronn said softly. You taught me that too. By the time the bell sounded, a single blunt note that made the air in the halls tremble and the old dust jump, the choice had been made. Not by Jast, whose hands hung like fish down his sides and whose lips moved without making sense. Not by Tyrion, who walked with his hands visible and his brain like a careful animal behind his eyes, but by the men who heard that note and chose to turn their feet toward the great hall, or toward their women, or toward the door that led to the water stairs, by whether they took up a spear first, by the way they let their faces be seen and not seen. You seize stone by seizing what lives in it. Bronn went ahead with the bell's echo in his blood, and the keys in his hand making his palm ache. He had a feeling like he had on the morning the sun rose over the Blackwater and found the river afire, this trembling between fear and something that was not quite joy and not quite hunger but lived in the same room. They entered the great hall as men entered a church after a flood. The banners were hung too high and too clean. Torches made too much noise. A woman in a white shift stood with her hands full of apples that had fallen and lay between her feet like small dead suns. A boy in a tabard that was too large for him and bore the lion too bright looked at Bronn the way a dog looked at a man who had brought a fresh bone. One of the old men, the bell ringer, by the look of him, with rope burns for bracelets, stared and then began to laugh. That sound was swept up and changed and fell back in a way that told Bronn he would remember it, not for itself, but for what followed. Men of the Rock, Tyrion said, mounting 2 steps of the dais as if it were a mechanical thing that would lift him if he put his feet right. You remember me. He spoke with no effort and more grace than he ought. Some of you remember the boy who learned to swear here. Some remember the man who went away. I have come back as a messenger of necessity. The world beyond these stones burns and will continue burning. Fires do not ask permission from stone to mount them. The Rock's garrison is thinned by wars that were not yours and claims that did not feed you. The harbor is cordial and quietly unfaithful. The mines give up their last like a miser dying, though I am told a seam was found below the old seam. And men sing to keep the black earth off their faces. He let his eyes move once around the ring of faces. They had been trained to stand still. He did not mistake stillness for loyalty. I am not the lord you expected. I am the son you did not want. I bring with me a man you did not plan for. He turned his head one little degree so that a line appeared at the corner of his mouth. Sir Bronn. The name made little noise yet. Bronn had known it would be so. Names can be whistles until life fills them. He showed the keys. He did not raise them high. He let their weight talk. He had the Castellan at his left, with a look of a man who has sat down in the wrong house, at the wrong table, and is trying to remember which fork. The Rock needs a man who eats like you do, Bronn said. He was not good at speeches, and did not crave to be. You don't need pretty words from me. You need meat. You need pay. You need not to be made brave for other men's banners. I'll do that. You don't need to like me. You need to bring me a ledger and I will put coin on the right lines. You need to bring me a sword and I will see it stays sharp without going through your belly. If there is work, there is pay. If there is theft, there is consequence. If there is courage, there is bread first and beer second, and the right kind of songs later. Benhawan. That made more noise. The bell ringer laughed again and said something about how he'd sung for less. Men look to each other in such moments. If the man to my right blinks, I blink. If he knots his mouth, I not mine." The boy with the too large tabard dropped his spear and scrambled to pick it up. That image, of a small spear on the floor of a great hall, remained in Bronn's head in a way that pleased him. It was not what poets kept, but it was what he kept. "Where is the Lord?" a voice cried. Bronn looked for it, and found it in a woman with gray in her braid, and a mark on her face too deep to be anything but a life lived. She stood near the aisle and did not lower her chin when men around her shifted to put her outside the line of sight. "In the city that calls itself the world," Tyrion said, "on a seat that shrinks men where it should frighten them larger." His voice was iron and lemon in the same breath. "Do not look east for a man with hair like straw who carries promises like arrows. Your life is here. The rock needs a hand on the day that belongs to it. It has one now." He looked at Bronn again then, and men saw him looking and chose where to put their eyes. It was not a coronation. It was uglier than that, and more honest. It required ledger books and lines of men. It required quiet conversations on stone stairs with men who had thought themselves loyal to another, and found they were hungry first. Bronn spent the day the way a butcher spends a morning after a famine. Steady work, little noise, blood on his apron and meat at the end of it. When the sun finally put its tongue on the edge of the world, and the hall smelled of sweat and smoke, he took himself to the Lord's solar. He was not a man to like furniture, but there are rooms that make men and rooms men make. This room had a window that looked west. He stood with his hands behind his back and felt the sea make its old sound. The desk was a black slab. The tapestries showed versions of lions that might have been drawn by men who had never seen one, gaunt or foolish or too fat. All wrong and all right, because the rock did not require rightness. It required endurance and a willingness to be looked at and not flinch. He placed the keys on the desk and stood looking at them. He could feel the pull of a lifetime tugging at his shoulders in two directions. If no one is going to give you the thing, take it. He had taken it. He felt no revelation. He felt a fatigue that was not unpleasant, like the ache in an arm that has won a bout without breaking. He reached for the wine that had been left there in a glass shaped like a bell, and tasted it. It was good in the way certain lies are good, because they go down smooth and feel like the truth for a time. His knee twinged and he sat in the chair because he had a chair. He let himself imagine, for the length of a sip, a life in which men came through the door when his voice called and not to kill him first. A cough sounded then in the shadow by the hearth. Bronn did not start. Men who start too much get used to it. He had left no guards in the room because a man with guards makes an argument he may not be ready to win. The cough belonged to a man who had learned to wear being ignored like a garment. He stepped forward with a kind of courtesy older than banners and put both hands together before him. "Maester Colmar," he said, "because names make bridges." "My lord," the maester said, the word tasting careful in his mouth. He was thin and wrong-angled, with the chain around his throat looking like something he had accepted as a weight early, and had never quite grown used to. His hair was white, but not old white. It was the white of a man who had burned at both ends and been hoisted out of the fire just before turning to ash. "I bring you the ledger you asked for, and a list of grievances from the merchant benches, and a letter from the Iron Bank's factor. The factor says he would see you on the morrow, on the morning bell, if you are a man who cares to be seen." "Now that's a factor," Bronn said. He liked the word. It had something to do with making, not merely counting. "Tell him I care. Tell him I care so much I might be sick with it." The maester's face did not move much. His eyes did something, the way a mouse's eyes do when it is deciding whether the crumb is worth the risk. "The factor is a man who reads men," he said. "He's a man who reads ledgers," Bronn corrected. "Men are ledgers with worse handwriting." He tapped the book. "Show me what the rock owes and who owes the rock." They bent over the book together with the window going blue. The maester's finger moved down columns. "Wheat in from Hawthorne Field. Salted beef from Broombridge. Candles from a waxman in Lannisport with ambitions beyond his molds. Tithes gone unpaid by 3 villages because the harvest had rotted with a wet summer that should not have been. Wages owed to miners who sang dirty songs in the dark to tell time." "They do that?" Bronn asked, and the maester said yes, that he had heard them himself. And then, as if surprised to be telling this to a man with scars on his hands, he hummed a line. It was filthy and oddly cheerful. We cheered men with cleaner mouths than that across rivers and sent them to die, Bronn said. I like these better. He put his finger on a column. And the mines. The mines are a house you inherit that one day discovers rooms. It did not tell you it had, the maester said. He did not bother to make the sentence shorter. An old seam is played out. A new seam is found below the old, not gold, so much as promise. Men come up with faces that make their wives turn their heads away before turning them back. We do not know if it will make us whole again, or only keep hunger's hands off for a winter. But it is singing. Then we go down to it, Bronn said. Tomorrow, after I have smiled at the man who pretends to make coin from figures and who actually makes coin from fear. The maester's mouth caught at the word smiled. You are not what I expected, he said. No, Bronn said. Nor are you. He picked up the keys again and let them rest. Send to the kitchens. Bread and meat for the men whose faces I've seen already tonight. Send to the barracks. Tell them the first men who come to me with a list of names of good men and bad in their company will be the first to eat tomorrow. Bendanor. You will make them informers, the maester said, and did not make it a question. I will make them useful, Bronn said. Men like to be useful, especially when they think it is their idea. He looked at the window again. The sea made its breath under the last of the light. And send 2 men you trust with wits and quiet feet. For what? For my guest, Bronn said. The word fit his mouth as it had earlier, oddly sweet. We must put him in a room with a lock that makes a better sound than the one I came through. Tyrion's cell had a window slit with stone lips. He could stand with his cheek at it and see a sliver of salt water like a blade. And sometimes, when the wind shifted, the spray would carry up and kiss the stone and the drops would leap in and strike his face. Sea water on skin is a sensation that can make a man remember too much. Tyrion stood and listened to the rock, breathed and thought of a time he had dreamed of putting a match to the drapes in his father's solar and watching the flames speak a language he could be proud to know. He remembered other rooms and other cages. This one had honest stone and no one pretending the latch was mercy. When Bronn came that first night, he did not pretend. He sent his quiet men ahead with a tray. Bread, a little salt beef, a yellow cheese that sweated at the edges, a cup of something younger than wine but more useful, small beer, clean enough not to kill a man twice. Tyrion ate because his body was a creature that insisted upon its due. He let the beer run to the back of his throat and felt all the places in his chest that had gone dry with the night become less like dust. When Bronn stepped into the way of the slit and became sky, and then became man again, Tyrion did not move from where he leaned. If you were going to kill me, he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, you would not have sent cheese. A man is killed more efficiently with no cheese and much thirst. Then tea. If I kill you, Bronn said, the room gets bigger and my choices get smaller. I like my rooms small and my choices clear. He came to the slit, but did not try to see Tyrion's eyes. How is my guest? Considering whether to become a ghost, Tyrion said dryly. Become something else instead, Bronn said. Become a coin. He took something from his belt and put it under the door. It slid and kissed Tyrion's boot. He bent and picked it up. It was one of the old Lannister mintings, heavy, with a lion that had been rubbed thin by being touched instead of spent. The way men treat luck when they think luck is a thing. That's what you are. A coin. Men will come to me and they will say, "Do you have him? Does he talk? Does he sneer? Can he still drink more than he should and make sense?" And I will shake the purse and hear whether it rings. Don't look so scornful. Coins do good. They don't care whose name is on them. You've chosen a dangerous purse, Tyrion said, weighing the coin in his palm. There are men who will pay much to have me, and then pay again to have me hanged. They love twice, once with their pride and once with their fear. I know, Bronn said. That's why I'll ask both. He leaned shoulder to stone. Do you hate me? Tyrion considered. Hate was a word that ate you from within. It made a man feel large, while making his world smaller. "I am thinking whether to spend the energy," he said. "You always were what you are. A knife that jokes. A coat that fits the next man if the first drops dead in a narrow place. I hired you with the knowledge that you could leave me the way a river leaves a man who cannot swim. It would be foolishness to hate a river for being a river." "Damn. That's not no," Bronn said with something like amusement. "I'll take it." He tapped the stone with a knuckle. "I'll send for you. You'll talk to men through this wall. I'll put ears in and out of it. You'll be clean and fed and alive, and your words will buy bread and iron and men who aren't brave. And when the time comes to set a price for your breath, I'll set it fair and see who wants to pay." He paused. "You can choose on that day who to go to, or you can choose not to. Coin has some say in where it goes. If no one takes it, it sits in the dark and waits." Tyrion, surprise warming some small place that had been cold all the long climb, said, "You've thought this through." "You don't take the rock with only one kind of thinking," Bronn said. "I've had to use all the kinds I own." He took a breath. The sea spoke through the slit. "Sleep. The morning brings men who think themselves clever. I need you rested for them." "Thou." Tyrion lay down on the pallet afterward and stared at the ceiling that was stone but might have been sky if he let his mind be kinder. He turned the coin in his fingers and thought about how the rock breathed. It was true. He had known it as a boy. He had forgotten deliberately sometime between the first killing joke his father laughed at and the last cup he lifted in another city under a star that had no name in the west. He let himself feel tired then truly, and the sleep came cold and quick. In the morning the factor from the Iron Bank came as if he had always been coming. He was a man with a sparse beard like the suggestion of something that might grow into fullness if given care, with eyes that took and put what they took onto little shelves for later. He wore a coat the color of bread, before the crust sets and rings that did not flash, because the room did that work for them. He walked with his hands at his back, as if the world were something he had owned long enough to be gentle with. "Lord of the Rock," he said to Bronn without a minute of mockery. He placed on the desk a little box cut of black wood that smelled faintly of maple. Inside was a letter that had a million ways of saying no, and one way of saying yes. The factor spoke in the way men speak, who love numbers the way others love sons. He did not pretend morality. He did not pretend anything other than what he was. A man who made fear into measures and sold and bought time the way his grandfather might have bought and sold ice on a summer morning. "You'll have what's owed," Bronn said. "You'll have it when the rock is sure it has it to give. You'll have proof you like before I give it to men I like." "Men? We prefer impartial proof," the factor said. "Proof is a commodity I must store in a vault that is not its own justification." "You like your sentences curled up like cats," Bronn said. "Here it is straight. The minds sing. You'll hear their song. I'll give you a man from your own benches down there with a candle and a count of breath to see if it makes sense. You'll move my debt to a place where the words are less sharp. You'll tell your friends in the East that they have a friend in the West who has a castle they like to dream about. You'll ignore letters from people telling you the rock is not to be trusted and send men who do not take bribes to prove it wrong." "Men shall." The factor did not smile. His eyes did something smaller than that and more dangerous. "You are not a Lannister," he said. "No," Bronn said. "I'm the man who owns the table they've been eating at for now. Sit." "You'll get bread, and you'll get numbers." They wrestled politely, and then nastily, and then politely again, the way men do who respect each other's keenest vices. When the factor left, he took with him a sheaf of promises that were closer to truth than most, and left behind a sense that the world was going to begin counting again, and that Bronn had to move faster or slower accordingly. The maester stood by the door afterward like a bad thought. A man keeps meaning to forget and cannot. "You quarrel with men who do not know what quarreling is," Calmer said. "I speak their language badly and well enough," Bronn said. He grabbed bread from the platter left and tore it, and put it in his mouth, and chewed the way you chew when you are doing sums. Send for 10 of the black stairs. The maester blinked. Who? My name for them, Bronn said. The men who keep the stair down to the water. The men who tell other men where to put their feet so they do not die on stone. I pay them. I talk to them. I tell them stories. They will be my left hand. He wiped crumbs away with the back of his thumb. And tell a boy to run to the mines. I'm going down. If the rock breathes, I'll hear it at the rib. Down. They went in the afternoon when the ocean was abruise, and the gulls had grown bold and settled on the ledges to laugh at men. The path to the lower levels was the kind of path the world ate. It went in curves that made sense to men who had learned to walk them when they were boys, and did not to men who thought a straight line is the only line. The air grew colder and older. Water found ways to be present everywhere. Bead on rock, sheet on wall. Stubborn drop in the corner of a stair that fell to the floor with the persistence of years. In the mine, men became black shapes with white eyes. They sang because singing keeps a man alive, and because if silence finds you, you think of death, and your brother who died, and the thought makes you slow, and when you are slow, the air eats you. Bronn stood in the first chamber and listened. The song was not the maester's filthy song. This was a hummed thing about a woman who had refused a man until he brought her a handful of gold he had found with his bare hands. And when he did, she refused him again because the gold made her teeth ache. The humor of it, the truth of it, the way it did not pretend to be other than it was, pleased Bronn. The foreman came forward with a lantern and a face that had become Stone's cousin through long marriage. You're him, he said. He did not bother with titles, which Bronn held as a mark of respect rather than the lack of it. Men who used titles too quickly wanted something they would not be given. You'll want to see it. They went down another stair and into another chamber that became, at the lower edge of light, a throat that went and went. The seam was not beautiful. It was a dark wall that glittered where the lantern's tongue licked it. Gold is not what songs teach. It is stubborn and ugly and becomes beautiful only when beaten. Bronn put his hand to the wall and felt stone colder than the sea had been. He grinned. It was not a pretty grin. It was a man showing his teeth to a thing he wanted that might bite him. Get men who haven't been paid first, he said. Get men whose wives are hungry fed. Get candles from the port that do not gutter. Send boys we trust down with counters, and have them count breaths out and in and then out again and write how it goes, and if it goes faster when we open that shaft there, and how much faster, and if it kills a man faster. We'll not dig deep for gold if we're burying the men as we do it. I want a mine that acts like it likes us. Bah. The foreman looked at him as if he had not thought to hear such words from a man with a sword. Bronn did not take that as a compliment. He took it as information. We'll see it, the foreman said. We'll do it. There's more earth shit down there than any man is brave enough to say in front of his wife. Ben. Bronn laughed then. Short and real. Good, he said. Let it be the rock shit then. If I can get money out of that, I'll be a genius and a liar both. Back in the solar before dusk, Bronn stood at the window and watched a sail cut the light into strips. He had not asked for this part, where the world becomes a place you are responsible for, instead of a place you are responsible for escaping. He did not dislike it. It was a different game, that was all. Instead of finding seams, he had to become one. He had to be the crack men could go through to get to air. He had to be narrow and strong and dark and unforgiving and present. He could do that. He had done worse. Tyrion sat on his pallet at the same hour, the coin in his palm, and thought of 1,000 ways to make a man like Bronn fall. He did not cling to the thought. He let it pass like boats he had no gold to buy. He focused instead on what vices came to men who held keys. They came like flies to jam. He thought of letters he would write and not send, and of men who would think themselves writers in return. He made a map in his head of the rock, the way a man in a cell makes a garden. In the port, a woman with an apple bruise on her cheek counted coins at a table and smiled without showing her teeth. She had been the Castellan's mistress last night, and today she was a woman who knew where men put their cups. She kept one coin for herself because a man had said a sentence to her that used the word consequence, and she wanted the word to have another meaning in her day. In the great hall, boys wrestled and did not know they were wrestling for a future. In the mine, a man coughed and wiped black from his lips and laughed because the foreman had said pay today like a promise. In the long westering, the bell of the port was finally rung for a ship that had come in, and the sound trembled in the stone briefly and made its way out into the open air and became nothing. Letters came the third day and the fifth and the seventh like weather. One from the city, where the throne huddled like a crow on iron. One from a lord inland who had pretended to be asleep all through a war and was now pretending to wake while keeping his eyes closed. One from a woman whose family crest had once been hammered out of silver on a plate and stolen by a boy who later became a man who forgot why he had stolen it. Bronn read what he could read, and had the maester read what he could not, and paid attention to the parts where men thought they had hidden themselves. He did not write back much. He sent messages that were not literate and made promises that were not pretty. He sent coin when a coin would answer better than prose. He sent a man when a man would speak louder than ink. On the 9th evening, he went down to Tyrion's cell with a cup of wine that was better than the beer and a plate of olives and small meats on sticks that had been made by a cook who had learned to dress simple things elegantly from a summer mistress who had taught him love was cheap and presentation was dear. He sat on the other side of the door and leaned his head back and did not pretend to be doing anything else. "Drink with me," he said. "I was going to ask if you were going to talk to me first or to the wall," Tyrion said. He took the cup. He drank and made the face of a man who had found the bottom of something that kept becoming deeper. "We have a visitor," Bronn said. "He comes tomorrow. He's fair of hair and carries himself like a man who has convinced a horse not to throw him. He's written one of the letters you read me a word from, and then stopped. He doesn't love many men. He doesn't love you. He doesn't love me. But he thinks himself a man who can make what he loves when he needs it. He wants to tell me a story in which I am a villain, and he is a hero, and the rock is a prize at the end of his lesson." He lifted his own cup, drained it, poured another. "You'll talk to him through the wall. He'll decide whether to recognize your voice. He might want to cut open the wall to find you. He might want to set the sea on fire again. He will wear a sword that has done work, and he will pretend it hasn't." Tyrion closed his eyes and saw his brother's face as it had been once, and as it had been later, and as it might be tomorrow. He put the cup down carefully. He pressed his palm to the stone. It was cold and old and alive. "When he comes," he said, "tell him to bring bread." "I thought you'd say wine," Bronn said. "Bread is less likely to be poisoned," Tyrion said, and when Bronn laughed, truly laughed, he laughed a little too. The sound rose in the small stone room and went nowhere. It stayed where it had been made and warmed the air and then disappeared. That night, the wind turned. It came from the north with a smell of pine and distance on it. The sea changed its sentence structure to accommodate the new grammar, but it said the same thing it had always said. The rock breathed. Men slept and woke, and went about the small conspiracies of hunger and hope. The keys on Bronn's table made the sound keys make when a room settles in cooling air. The maester wrote a letter he would never send. The foreman told a boy to sing louder. The Castellan's mistress, no one's mistress now if she could help it, counted her coins and placed 2 in a sock, and hid the sock in a place a child would find if he were looking for sweets. Because she had no child and liked the idea of a future surprising her. On the 10th morning, a rider came up the slope to the rock with sunlight sheathing him, and men who had never raised spears for a Bronn raised them now because you raise what you have when a man comes and your belly wants to know what meal is next. Bronn stood at the window and watched him come, and Tyrion stood in his small room and listened for a footstep 1 degree heavier than another, and the world waited in the brief good silence before it speaks. A bird crossed the slit of sky and became a bird again on the other side. The bell in the port did not ring. The foreman's song did. The visitor rode into the great court and did not dismount at once. He sat a heartbeat too long like a man who is remembering sitting on another horse in another place on a day when he didn't want to dismount because of what waited when he did. Then he swung his leg over and came down and put one gloved hand on the horse's neck, and spoke a word to it that made the horse turn its head to breathe him in. He took off his glove and held it in the other hand as if he meant to slap a man later with it, and make that man laugh, and then duel. Bronn met him at the top of the stairs to the hall with the same expression he wore meeting a man with a purse. He waited to see whether the weight was too little or too much. The visitor smiled. It was a good smile, forged in a better place than most men get theirs. "You know me," he said. "I do," Bronn said. He did not bow. "And you know me?" "I do," the visitor said, and did not look at the keys. "Where do we talk?" "Where men have to listen to the stones when they speak," Bronn said. "The hall will do." They went in, and the hall waited with that old thing it held that was not patience so much as skull. Men stood at a distance you could measure with a spear's length. Tyrion leaned with his cheek against the slit, and could not see the man but could see the movement, when he put his hand out to the table, and curled his fingers around an edge, as if he were measuring whether it could bear weight. "Bread," Bronn said. And a boy came running with a loaf hot enough to bless a room. The visitor broke it, and handed a piece to Bronn, and put a piece in his own mouth, and chewed. It was good bread, honest, and more than flour. It had herbs in it, crushed, that made the air green for a moment. "You'll hear a voice," Bronn said. "Listen to it with the part of you that isn't wearing your sword." Tyrion spoke then, and the visitor closed his eyes, and the bread paused against his teeth. The hall grew quieter, which is a trick halls do not enjoy doing. Men become aware of their own breathing, and feel suddenly rude. They feel naked, and loved, and at risk, and hunger, and full. That mix is a recipe for war, or for weddings, depending on what a man has brought in his hands. The visitor told a story the way Bronn had said he would, with himself at the middle of it like a candle, and everything else casting shadows outwards. Tyrion told another story, where men were small or large depending on how much they could see over their own pride. Bronn listened to both, and listened for the third story beneath, the one told by stone. The rock did not care much who sat and who stood, but it had preferences about men who wasted rooms, and men who made rooms useful. It had, Bronn had come to believe, a memory for the cost of men's certainties. "Come walk," Bronn said at last. "Not to the sea. You all want to go to the sea. To the mine." Mendido. They went down the stairs with torches that threw their light ahead and took it away behind. Men who had never put their boots on those steps followed, because they wanted to see what the world was insisting on today. In the mine, the foreman did not stop singing to show deference to a man with a sword. He turned a fraction and nodded the way a man nods at his dog. The visitor lifted the torch. The seam did not care. "Here's what this place is now," Bronn said. He spoke to the stone, to the man next to him, to the eyes behind the slit of a cell, and to the boy who had brought bread. "It's earth and men and breath and coin, and the moments where one of those fails. It's keys and knives in the line between dying brave and eating. I can hold it. Don't mistake me. I can hold it. I can hold it with men who love nothing that will not love them back. I can hold it because I have been hungry, and because I know the weight of a roof that doesn't leak on a night like this. I can hold it better than men who think their father taught them everything stone knows." Memsel. The visitor put his hand to the seam, palm to cold. He breathed out. He was a man who liked horses and women and pride, and the simple feel of wood, worn by men who had held it before him. He was not a man who liked mines. His expression went ill at first, then thoughtful. "What do you want?" he asked Bronn finally, turning with the torch, making his face a cut coin. "Other than breath and bread and a night without knives." "I want exactly that," Bronn said. "I want to make a place where men don't have to be brave all the time to be fed. I want a hall where the chairs work, and no one fights me for them unless they're willing to go down to this seam and sell their breath for it afterward. I want coin that spends, and promises that cost the man who makes them something." He flicked a look at Tyrion's slit, as if he could see it. "I want to hold a coin that talks. I want to hear who speaks back." "You'll have war," the visitor said. He did not say his sister's name, and did not need to. It sat between them like a bright knife. "You will have 3 kinds of war. The kind that rides. The kind that writes. The kind that starves a man. Can you hold then? Bronn bared his teeth again. It was not a smile. The men near him took a breath all together and made a wind inside the rock. Try me, he said. And the way he said it made something in the stone answer the way a drum answers a hand. They went back up into the light. The day had turned clean in that way a west wind can scour a place. The gulls had quieted as if they had learned something new to laugh at, and were chewing it before crying it out. Bronn went to his solar and did not sit immediately. He stood at the window with his hands flat on the sill, and felt the rock breathe and the sea answer. He thought of a life where he had died in a ditch with his name not said correctly. He thought of the boy who dropped his spear, and of the mistress counting coins, and of the foreman humming in the earth, and of the maester's careful sentences, and of Tyrion's voice calling truth a habit to be maintained, the way a man maintains a sword with oil. Night came as it always comes in the west, like a door closing with a sigh. The lanterns of Lannisport were lit one by one, until the harbor was a new sky under the cliff. The wind lifted and turned and lay down again. The bell, for reasons that were ordinary and therefore unfathomable, did not ring. In the small room, Tyrion lay awake with his coin in his hand and made bargains with gods he did not believe in, and with himself, who he believed in too much when he was tired. He spoke to the rock in his head because the rock is as good a god as any and better than most. It does not pretend to want the blood of men, only their patience. He told it stories and made it promises, and asked it for seams. On the ramparts, a boy stood his first night watch and told himself 100 times not to scratch, because the itch would go if he ignored it, and grow if he didn't. He thought about bread and the girl with the iron ring, and the way the new lord had said consequence, and made it sound like a thing made of oak, and not of smoke. He watched the horizon where the sea met the dark, and tried to see a ship that wasn't there yet, and promised himself he would see it first when it came. Bronn sat in the chair he had taken and let the quiet put its hands on his shoulders. He had put his hand about a thing too large for any man. He had done it with humor and knives and hunger and a sense for doors. If the world loved him, it would be for the wrong reasons. If it hated him, that would be a better help. He leaned back and closed his eyes and saw, not for the first time, a girl laughing in a barn when rain made the roof say yes. And he thought perhaps the rock would laugh too, if he learned its joke. He slept at last. The rock breathed. The sea did what seas do. Somewhere far to the east, a woman with a mouth like a vow turned in her sleep and dreamed of fire. Somewhere to the south, a man with a beard like a net counted coin and smiled, because numbers had behaved. Somewhere north, a wolf wakefulness moved through pines. In the west, a sellsword who had taken what no one gave him dreamed of nothing, and woke before dawn with the taste of salt in his teeth, and the knowledge that tomorrow he would have to be another kind of man than he had been today, and that he might be equal to it if he kept his hunger and learned the rock's breathing. Morning put a gray finger on the window, and then a pale hand. Bronn rose and put his palms on the desk, and the keys on the desk, and the day on his back. He walked the halls and felt men looking. Not like worshippers, and not like enemies. He liked that. The maester brought him a sheaf of names, and he cut them down until they were men, and not ink. He stood in the great hall and ate meat with his fingers, and let grease slick his mustache, and did not wipe it away until he had made 3 decisions that would spend men and earn others. He sent a boy with a message to a woman in the port, who had the sense to keep coins in a sock, and who had the patience to hand them back when a day was better. He sent a man with a message to a hill-hold, where cows outnumbered swords. He wrote a letter himself. It took long because letters written by men like Bronn do. But at the end of it, he had put down a good sentence about consequences and bread, and the iron smell the earth makes when you cut it. Tyrion listened to footsteps and sorted them. He learned the difference between Bronn's and the visitors, between the maester's caution and the foreman's never-quiet shoes. He learned the rock's breath again. He made a friend of a spider in the corner and named it something inappropriate, and then forgot its name and called it friend. He waited and ate and pissed and slept and woke and made the kind of plans a prisoner makes, which have nothing to do with escape and everything to do with remaining a person. That afternoon, A shadow crossed the slit he watched. It was not a bird. It was too quick and too deliberate. It made his heart misstep and then correct itself. He leaned close enough to chip his cheek on stone. The shadow came again, and then another, and the air took on a quality he had learned thousands of miles east, where the sun tried to kill men, and the sand obeyed. The smell was not smoke. It was what comes before smoke. Oils waking, heat schooling itself. He stepped back. He held the coin in his palm. He said quietly, to the rock, to himself, to the spider, to Bronn wherever he was being another kind of man. Not yet. Above, on the walls, boys who had not scratched itches forgot them. Men who had learned to love the slow regularity of the sea's hump and sigh forgot it. The world sharpened like a knife on a stone. Bronn came to the parapet with the visitor at his shoulder, and the maester behind, with a face like a comma someone had not decided whether to use. They looked west. The shadows came again, and this time, they had edges. The wind changed schools. Gulls rose and made a crown of themselves, and then broke. There, the visitor said softly. No one needed to ask where. Bronn's hand went to the keys. He would never stop doing that. He knew now. He would touch them as men touch old wounds to remind themselves of their geography. He looked at the sky and then at the sea. He measured the rock's breath. He said to himself the old rule again and again, like a prayer that had proven itself true when others had not. If no one is going to give you the thing, take it. He set his feet. He smiled. Not pretty. He did not take his eyes from the edge of the world. He had a castle. He had a coin in a cell. He had the rock's slow heart under him and a seam of promise below, and a woman counting coins in a sock and a boy on a rampart who would remember tonight more than he would remember his own wedding one day. He thought about bread in consequence, and the way laughter can open a room, and the way a knife can close it. He thought about how men tell stories about nights like this. How they call them beginnings when really they are continuations. Welcome to dinner, he said to the visitor, and to the sky, and to whatever came out of it. He did not say it loud. He did not need to. The rock heard him. The sea carried it and roughed the edges and sent it back. In his cell, Tyrion put the coin to his lips and tasted old gold. He closed his eyes and saw a boy with small hands tracing the seam of the window ledge, memorizing the measure of stone. He opened them and was a man. He stood very still. He listened to the rock breathe and told it, without moving his mouth, that he was ready to translate for it when men misunderstood what it said next. He lifted his head. Somewhere above, a bell began to ring. It sounded like the old bell of the port, and like a new bell some smith had made with a private thought in his head. It sounded like a command and a question and an answer, all together, ringing from stone and into air and back again.